G'day ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Draw with Jazza. I'm Jazza and this is a video tutorial on drawing the muscles in the arms. Before we get started, I want to say 3 disclaimers that you need to keep in mind. First and foremost, I am not an expert and I don't know everything about anatomy, which leads me to point number 2. This isn't a lesson on the technicalities so much of muscles, how they work, what they're called, but it is an aesthetic lesson. So we're going into how we can make muscles look good if we draw them in simple forms, even if we're not educated about everything to do with them. And third, while I will be drawing male anatomy, more like male muscles and arms, that's mainly because they have a more rigid and solid large frame in which we can show off the muscles a bit more. So getting straight into it, I have a preset little example here of what a front arm and a back arm look like. So, and if I were to get rid of my construction lines behind there, they are some simple line work examples. So you can see, without showing too much technicality, without showing where the muscles connect and all this stuff, you can still see that this here is the front, this here is the back, and it seems to be anatomically correct for the most part, unless you're super educated and you can see all my flaws, and that doesn't matter, I don't care. Alright, so what I want to do is get started by just kind of coming in here and separating the muscles into their separate groups, and then we can go from there. So by kind of deconstructing, getting under the skin and dividing these areas, we'll be able to, after, be able to reconstruct having that knowledge. So, where I normally begin is with the shoulders. So let me just grab my... Okay. Now, many of you know that muscles are these, big groups of all those little cord things. Again, I don't know technicalities. But, rather than it just being one big clump, like for instance in the bicep, one just big clump, muscles most often seem to be in these groups of strands, clumps of these strands that form the one shape. So the shoulder shape overall is this larger sort of tucked in shape that begins up here and bulges over, and it's kind of got that sort of Uno symbol shape. I'll have both viewed here. There we go. So that's the basic shape of the shoulder muscle. But when I say it's divided into sort of clumps, if you go to Google and look up shoulder anatomy or arm anatomy, you'll see that there are very much rigid little groups of clumped up muscles that intertwine and subdivide, something like that. Now, that may not be the exact positioning, but it's inside these that all those little strands of muscle are together, but they have their own separate little clump things. Now, when you want to draw someone who's very, what we call ripped, so like, how bodybuilders or martial artists tend to have these lines in the middle of their muscles, like in the middle of their shoulder, in the middle of their bicep. That's the definition between these clumps and groups of muscles popping out. Okay, so that's the shoulder. Now I will, without going into the torso muscles themselves, point out that the shoulder is tucked between the neck and the chest. The chest is actually very much attached to the shoulder. And we'll get into that in a moment, which is why when people lift their arms, the chest muscle kind of comes up too, because it's kind of connected to this shoulder muscle. So anyways, I'll just kind of do those rough edges there. Okay, so that's the shoulder. So next is when people say, talk about arm muscles, the first muscle that comes to mind in almost all cases would be the bicep, and that's this big thing here. And that's the thing that bodybuilders flex when they get on stage, and they do that. Or like in Transformers, when it's like, see the thing reflecting. He was trying to pop out his bicep, but he didn't have much of one, which is the joke, which is why it was hilarious. Ho, ho, ho. So I'm just outlining the bicep on these two examples here. Now, while the bicep is one of the most noticeable muscles in the body, when you're drawing someone who the focus is to make them look very strong and very muscular, you don't need to just make the bicep bigger. I used to fall into that trap as a kid. You think, oh, big biceps equals someone stronger, so you just draw people with massive biceps if you're drawing a superhero or the Hulk or something. But to be completely honest, it's enlarging all these muscles in proportion with each other, and kind of having their mass pronounced in the same way, having the definition in the in-between areas, like, in here and in here and in here, having that defined, all those things add up to making someone look more muscular. So as with the shoulder muscles, the biceps have those sort of subdivisions and all those clumps of muscle. You can't really see it too much from the back. Okay, next is the tricep. Now, when drawing muscular, heroic looking figures, the tricep actually, in my opinion, is one of the most impacting muscles that I find. I think if you can draw a good tricep in a mix of the arm, it ends up making the whole thing look like, first of all, you know what you're drawing, because triceps are kind of a tricky sort of shape. And second of all, it makes the character look much more refined and toned and muscular, because the tricep would be a very hard muscle to make stick out a lot. Anyways, so I'll start with the tricep in the back here, because that's where we can see it the clearest. I'll outline it. It's a funny sort of shape. It's sort of like this. Oops. I don't know how to describe it. If I was to draw it on the side here, it's like that. It's almost like it's in two parts. The shoulder juts into the top there, and then this bottom kind of cuts off, and it goes flat and goes into the elbow, and the bicep goes behind there. So that's where the tricep goes. So it's this middle jutting up bit that looks quite muscular. But that's because the tricep is actually in several parts, and that's where we add those lines that subdivide and make you look ripped, make your superheroes look extra super. Now, how that translates over from the front, it still translates, because you still need to see that there is a tricep from the front. It's like I said, it's not all just bicep. We have the tricep kind of stick out here, so you can see it poke out from behind, and even that is enough to make it look like it's really sticking out there. I'm going to hide my construction lines. I think that's getting quite confusing. Okay, so that's the bicep and tricep. Now, next thing that I like to draw, aside from turning that into the elbow and then transforming next into the forearm, when I go into the forearm, I think I focus on two muscles. Now, as you can tell here, we're keeping very, very simple in our definitions of what muscles we're making pop out, because obviously there are a lot more muscles in the arms than we're going into detail with, but we're just focusing on the few that, when you're drawing characters, that you can focus on and remember without having to remember all that information. So next, let's go into the forearm. And I tend to divide the forearm into two muscles. The first is, I don't have names for it. I should probably look them up. No, can't be bothered. But the first most obvious one begins up here. So let me just find it. And it comes all the way down, but it begins being tucked up between the bicep and tricep, and it goes all the way down the forearm, and it ends being tucked in front of the thumb. So it actually twists around the arm. So if you hold your arm in front of you, you'll notice that the muscle that sticks right here between the bicep and tricep, if you measure a line from there to your thumb, it wraps around. It's not a straight line. So that's the same with this muscle here. This is a sort of twisted muscle structure. Cool. Now, as it is seen on the other side, not entirely sure how it would show. It would probably be something like that. Then the second forearm muscle, as I draw it, again, I'm not the be-all and end-all on this topic, but this is my approach. Let's start on this side, is the reverse. It's the forearm muscle that starts between the bicep and tricep on the other side and ends up curling around and tucking behind the pinky finger, or the edge of the palm of the hand. So very similar thing. And when you just kind of keep a few of these things in mind when you draw the muscles, it makes things a lot easier to remember. So when I zoom out and we look at that as a whole, it doesn't look totally inaccurate to me. Now, if there is ever a medical professional watching this, or people who actually know what they're talking about, again, I repeat, this is an aesthetic approach lesson. But if we hide those lines and we look at the basic line work, when we wrap it around the muscles, we don't actually have to define all of the divisions between these muscles. We don't need to have all the little tendons that are dividing between the elbow and the tricep, or, you know, the muscles between the bicep and tricep. We just kind of leave space and think less is more. Small lines and you know, small definitions make a lot of difference. Now, if you're drawing characters that have a lot more definition and a lot more mass to them, then I would definitely recommend going and doing a lot more research for yourself. But for now, this is very much a guide to the basics. Now, I want to just do a couple of very quick examples as to how I would apply this approach into different poses. Now, I'll just give you two for now. The first one, let's do the good old bicep flex. So we start off with our construction lines. This is the torso. I'll just do half a torso. So that's the half the torso and the neck, and that's where the head would go. So our shoulder would be here. The arm would go out, elbow here, and the hand up here. I want to center this a bit so we can focus on the musculature. Is that a word? I don't know. Oh well. All right. So that's how I draw my construction lines. Nothing more complicated than that. My next step, for those who have seen other tutorials that I've done, I like to call it putting meat on the bones. But in this example, we're going to put muscle on the bones, which is meat, and then skin on the muscle. So we'll begin by, let's start with the chest, because the chest leads into the shoulder. Okay. So the chest. Now, we haven't gone into the chest muscles specifically yet, but we're just kind of getting that shape in. Okay, next, let's go into the shoulder. The shoulder has that start between the chest and the neck here. So we have that curve around. Now, because the arm is twisted, we need to show how these muscles fold into each other. So we can't draw really the rest of the shoulder yet because the bicep jumps in front of it. So what I'm going to do is grab a different color for the bicep, and we're going to draw that basic bicep shape in there. Whoops. No, not too happy with that. The reason I'm not too happy with that is because I need to keep something clearly in mind, and that is the principle of squash and stretch. Muscles are have a huge element of that, squash and stretch, meaning when everything is contracted and pulled in, everything is squashed and tight, and that's where when people flex, they're squashing the muscles to make them look bigger and to tense up. The next pose we'll do will focus much more on stretch. Okay, so that's the bicep, and as you can see, that pops out in front of the shoulder. So there's not too much more of the shoulder that I can do other than just refine that edge. Kind of comes in there. That tucks around like that. The bicep is this big hunk of meat. Now there is a kind of a muscle that's more connected to the back that we haven't really gone into, that I don't know the name of, but I used to think that they reminded me of like wings. This big armpit thing that would stick out, that it seems to be part of the back muscle, which is quite large, and that connects to the tricep. But I know that whenever there's the flexing, it kind of sticks out. So next I'll go into the tricep. Now when flexing again, it's this squash and stretch thing. So we have that tricep kind of, squash in like that. And there's always a bit of a gap between the tricep and the bicep. Now remember that while the bicep and the tricep might start in the same place, the tricep is always slightly shorter than the bicep and folds into itself. Cool. So that's the basics of that part of the arm. Next, we'll go into the forearm. So we have the bit where, if we go back, we remember that the forearm muscle between the front of the bicep and the tricep connects to the thumb. So the thumb is facing away from the camera here, and so is the front of the bicep and tricep. Whereas the inside, which is what we're actually seeing when someone flexes, they're lifting the inside of their forearm to be shown. And that is the bit that connects to the inside of the bicep and tricep, which is in here. So what starts here and connects to the pinky curls with the forearm and squashes and stretches. So remember to use that squash and stretch method. And we tuck it in. Remember, it connects between the bicep and tricep, comes up, connects to the pinky. And if we were drawing the behind area, the one that connects to the thumb, that would be very much tucked away. And let's not forget the bones. So we have the wrist bone here, pops out into the elbow, which goes through into the shoulder, and then we get into the hand. Cool. So that's my very messy, rough idea as to how I visualize the muscles before I actually draw the skin. Now, how I draw the skin on top of that is fairly surprisingly simple. So I'm just going to show only these muscles that I drew and start wrapping skin on the meat. So I'm just drawing the outlines and making sure that the overlays pop out where they're most prominent. I just want my lines to be smooth, that's why I keep redrawing them. If you can't tell by my voice, I've had a terrible flu this week. Ugh. My voice is getting all scratchy and sore. That's how much I'm willing to endure for your guys' entertainment / education, if that's something you're into. Oops. Okay. So you'll notice that with the flexing of the arm, it flexes as much the other muscles as it does the actual arm. Make that wrist bone pop out. So there we go. That's our first arm pose. And you can see that through the quick example I just drew up, that it looks fairly anatomically accurate. Make sure to keep the muscles folding into each other. And again, if you wanted to add more definition and make him look more ripped or more fit, you'd do things like, you know, add more definition, divide the muscles more, add these sort of rip lines that make the muscle look far more defined and worked. It also is what happens when there's a lot less fat in the skin, which these bodybuilders happen to be very good at not having. And there's an example of the difference between if I would draw someone fairly normal but very muscular and extremely grotesquely muscular. Cool. And as promised, I'll just give one more example. I just want to show the difference between the squash and stretch. So this will be a very similar example to this one here. In fact, I might take this, put it in the corner as a reference so I can use the same colors. Maybe that won't work. I'll put it over here. Yeah, that'll work. Okay. Anyways. So, same thing. I'll draw half a torso. Head, shoulders. Okay, so this is where the arm starts, and this one's going to be a stretch. This one's going to be like a Heil Hitler. Wow, I'm a horrible person. But yes, the outstretched arm. So, it'll go out like that. Same thing, let's just get the construction lines done. Okay, so step 2, we're going to, using the same colors, define the stretch, the same muscles, but the stretch of the muscles. Okay, so first thing I want to point out is this joining between the chest and the shoulder muscle. I want to show that again because especially when it's stretched out, it stands out quite a lot. Oops. So I'm going to have that chest. Now remember, when the chest is when the arm is raised, the chest lifts. In fact, you can try doing that yourself at home. Lift your arm and you'll notice that your chest area raises with it, so it goes up on an angle. That's exactly what happens in this here as well. It starts going up on this angle. So it has this diagonal sort of pattern instead of being, if the other arm was flat, the torso would be down like that. Okay, so we have that happening. That stretch begin to happen. Again, same thing. The shoulder curves over, and while it's connected to the chest, it's not as seen because it's kind of pulled back while the arm is stretching out in front. Now, same with the like I was going to say, I meant to say, the squash and stretch is the thing we're keeping in mind here. Because this arm is reaching out, definition isn't as needed because everything is being pulled and elongated in a uniform direction. They're not clashing against each other. They're not bulging and ripping out there. So everything is just kind of uniformly pulled into one direction. And the tricep doesn't even need to stick out as much in this example. See the difference between the bicep and tricep here and the bicep and tricep here. You can see a huge difference between the squash and the stretch. Now something interesting is going to happen next too. This muscle that begins on the underside of the bicep and tricep, the pinky is facing away from the viewer this time. So while it will start out at the front, it's going to curve out behind. So that's I used to have a lot of trouble knowing what to do with forearm muscles. I didn't know how they worked, but I think the way I kind of get around that now is just imagining two muscles that kind of curve around the arm. So that's how I do that one. And then the one that starts on the other side wraps around to be at the front. So there you go. And finally, we have things like the joints and the... God, I'm going to hell for this, aren't I? Ha 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 ha. There we go. I'll get rid of my reference on the side here. Don't need that anymore. And I'll pull this across. And same as before, I'll just go through and add those different levels of definition. So we have our first one where we define the muscle. And that's as simple as doing our outlines with keeping simplicity in mind and only drawing the lines where the contrast between the muscles overlaying each other is the strongest. Especially in this stretched form, you don't really need to do too much because they're not clashing so much. Oops, and then we finally get into things like the hand and other irrelevant stuff. Cool. So there's that, and same thing as in the other example. If we wanted to have a bodybuilder, while it wouldn't stand out as much as everything being squashed, which is why when they flex, most things are very squashed and contrasting to show the muscles as clearly as possible, you can still make them look extremely well defined and ripped by separating the muscles even more and adding these rip lines like this. So I hope that this video tutorial has been of help to those of you who don't quite know where to start or don't quite know how to approach drawing the arm muscles in the body. But again, just to recap, keep things pretty simple. By having a few little key things to remember, like where the bicep, tricep, and shoulder muscles are and how they intertwine. Same with the forearm muscles. You don't need to know everything. I don't even know the names of most of these things, but I know enough to get by, and I know enough to convey muscular anatomy. Thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed this video. Links are below to download the original files for reference. Remember, if you animate or draw something cool, be sure to share it on Newgrounds.com, the internet's best source for animations, games, art and music. Until next time, see you later.